देवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 16. Krishna chastises the serpent Kaliya, and we are going to discuss text 42 and 43. So this text does not have a purport, but still the verse has several details, so which we'll be discussing today. So please repeat after me. Bhuta Matra Indriya Prana Manaha Buddhi Ashaya Atmane Trigunena Abhimanena Gudha Sva Atma Anubhutaye Namaha Anantaya Sukshmaya Kutasthaya Vipaschite Nana Vada Anurodhaya Vachya Vachaka Shaktaye Bhutamatendriya Prana Mano Buddhyashayatmane Trigunena Bhimanena Gudhasvatmanubhutaye Namo Nantaya Sukshmaya Kutasthaya Vipaschite Nana Vadanurodhaya Vachya Vachaka Shaktaye Bhutamatendriya Prana Mano Buddhyashayatmane Trigunena Bhimanena Gudhasvatmanubhutaye Namo Nantaya Sukshmaya Kutasthaya Vipaschite Nana Vadanurodhaya Vachya Vachaka Shaktaye. Bhutamatendriya Prana Mano Buddhyashayatmane Gudhasvatmanubhutaye Namo Nantaya Sukshmaya Kutasthaya Vipaschite Nana Vadanurodhaya Vachya Vachaka Shaktaye. Bhutamatendriya Prana Mano Buddhyashayatmane Trigunena Bhimanena Gudhasvatmanubhutaye Namo Nantaya Sukshmaya Kutasthaya Vipaschite Nana Vadanurodhaya Vachya Vachaka Shaktaye. Matajis. Bhutamatendriya Prana Mano Buddhyashayatmane Trigunena Bhimanena गूढस्वात्मानुभूतये नमोऽनन्ताय सूक्ष्माय कूटस्थाय विपश्चिते नानावादानुरोधाय वाच्यवाचकशक्तये Bhuta of the physical elements, Matra, the subtle basis of perception, Indriya, the senses, Prana, the vital air of life, Manaha, the mind, Buddhi, the intelligence, Ashaya, and of material consciousness, Atmane, to the ultimate soul, Trigunena, by the three modes of material nature, Abhimanena, by false identification, Gudha, who causes to become covered over, Swa, one's own, Atma, of the self, Anubhutaye, perception, Namaha, obeisances, Anantaya, to the unlimited Lord, Sukshmaya, to the supremely subtle, Kutasthaya, who is fixed in the center, Vipaschite, to the omniscient one, Nana, various, Vada, philosophies, Anurodhaya, who sanctions, Vachya, of expressed ideas, Vachaka, and expressing words, Shaktaye, who possesses the potencies. Translation by disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: Obeisances unto you, who are the ultimate soul of the physical elements, of the subtle basis of perception, of the senses, of the vital air of life, and of the mind, intelligence, and consciousness. By your arrangement, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. We offer our obeisances unto you, the unlimited Supreme Lord, the supremely subtle one, the omniscient personality of Godhead, who are always fixed in unchanging transcendence, who sanction the opposing views of different philosophies, and who are the power upholding expressed ideas and the words that express them. So I'll read the translation again. Obeisances unto you, who are the ultimate soul of the physical elements, of the subtle basis of perception, of the senses, of the vital air of life, and of the mind, intelligence, and consciousness. By your arrangement, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. We offer our obeisances unto you, the unlimited Supreme Lord, the supremely subtle one, the omniscient personality of Godhead, who are always fixed in unchanging transcendence, who sanction the opposing views of different philosophies, and who are the power upholding expressed ideas and the words that express them. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing the discussion of this chapter. Krishna chastises the serpent Kaliya, and the pastime has been performed by Krishna. And now the wives of Kaliya are praying to the Lord. So we have been seeing that from past 3-4 verses. So here, this continuation of their prayer, it's a very philosophical prayer because it primarily speaks about the perfect understanding of three things. So Srila Prabhupada in his Bhagavad Gita purport, he writes that perfect knowledge means knowing three things, that is Chit, Achit and Ishvara. So Chit is the living entity, Achit is the material nature, the material energy, and Ishvara is the one who controls them both. So if you see in this verse, the first verse speaks about two things, that's Achit and the Chit, the living entity, before discussing it. So the translation goes, obeisances onto you. So the Nagapatis are paying obeisances onto Krishna. And who is that Krishna? He is the ultimate source of the physical elements. So there are these 5 physical elements, earth, water, air, fire and ether. So he is the ultimate soul of the physical elements. So it basically means that these elements come into picture, or these elements get manifested. And these elements have their properties and qualities only because Krishna has invested them with these properties and qualities. So when we speak about water, water has specific qualities, right? It's when we drink it, it quenches our thirst. It's cool. So these are the properties which are attributed to water, and these properties are given to water by Krishna. So therefore, the essence of these qualities of these elements actually comes from Krishna only. So therefore, he is the ultimate soul of the physical elements. So earth means that which gives strength. When we do construct building, the stones are there, and building is constructed with the basement and so on. So earth is able to withhold them. So there is strength. So where does that strength comes from? The strength is just a partial representation of Krishna's original strength. So even within this material realm, whatever opulences that we see, it is all Krishna's energy only. So that way he is the ultimate soul of the physical elements. And in 10th chapter also in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Athva bahunaitena kim gyatena tavajna vishtabhyahamidam krishnam ekam ksheno sthito jagat. So whatever opulences that we see, Krishna maintains and sustains them. He provides them with those attributes and qualities by just one of his amshas, that's all. So it's not difficult for him. So that way he is the ultimate soul of the physical elements. And he is also the ultimate soul of the subtle basis of perception and of the senses. So we'll discuss this a little more once we discuss this translation. He is the soul of the vital air of life. So this is pranavayu. So we breathe, right? And when pranavayu is circulating within our body, then we classify ourselves as living beings, and the functions of the body and the functions of different organs also take place properly because of this functioning or proper functioning of this life air. So this is attributed to Krishna, and we know that soul is there within the heart, or rather we are the soul, and because of the soul the pranavayu moves around the body. But if Paramatma is not present with us, then the soul by his own will and by his own endeavor will not be able to manipulate the material elements. So if we want to perform some activity, then the soul's will or desire is there, but the sanction, unless the sanction comes from the Lord, then we'll not be able to manipulate, we'll not be able to move our body, will not be able to perform work, knowledge acquiring senses and working senses will not work. So although the pranavayu is there and the pranavayu is directly attributed to the soul, without the presence of Paramatma, then none of these two things can act independently. So that way, he is the ultimate soul of the vital air of life as well. And of the mind, intelligence and consciousness. So these are the subtle senses. So when we categorize the senses, there is gross senses, there are subtle senses. So there are gross elements and subtle elements. So Krishna speaks about that in the 7th chapter in Bhagavad Gita. Bhumi rapo nalo vayu khammano buddhirevacha ahankar etiyame bhinna prakriti rashtada. So all these gross as well as subtle elements are separated energies of Krishna. But although we classify them, or Krishna classifies them as separated energy, but still they are energies of the Lord. So these energies cannot act independently from the Lord. So Krishna has to be the ultimate soul for all these different material elements as well. Then the Nagpatini continue, by your transcendental arrangement, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature. So they discuss about the Achit, how they are completely dependent. All these material elements and the manifestation of these material elements, like the senses and sense of perception, they are all dependent on the Lord. Similarly, the living entities who are there within this material world, they are also under the control of the Lord. So they say, by your arrangement, by Krishna's arrangement, the infinitesimal spirit souls, they falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. So the living entity's perception of its own true self is that he is always servant of Krishna. No, Jivera Swarupa Krishna Nityadas. He is always a servant of Krishna. But by Krishna's arrangement of these material elements and the three modes of material nature, the living entity falsely identifies himself with the body, or which the material elements. The spirit soul should identify himself with Krishna. Not that they both are equal to the same level, but that they both are spiritual. Aham Brahmasmi. The actual meaning of this term is that I am spirit soul, and Krishna is also a living entity. He is also spiritual. So therefore there is a unanimity. There is a connection between Krishna and the living entities, and that is perfect perception. But when that perception is identified, or when the living entity starts identifying himself with this material body, then his perception is false. And that perception of the living entity of misidentifying with the material nature, with his body, is also an arrangement of Krishna himself. So it is Krishna who actually puts the living entity into such a situation that he starts identifying himself with this body. So are we here to blame Krishna? That we will see later. Okay, so we'll discuss about it a little bit. But he is the one who arranges everything. Then they continue. We offer our obeisances unto you, the unlimited Supreme Lord. So this Ananta, so we see the verse, it is Namo Anantaya Sukshmaya. So now they are paying obeisances onto Ishvara, who controls these both, who controls Achit and who also controls Chit, the living entities. So they are saying he is Ananta, he is unlimited Supreme Lord. So he is not like a living entity, he is not like a normal living entity who comes under the influence, who misidentifies himself with the material nature, who comes under the influence of the three modes of material nature. Krishna is not like that. He is Ananta, he is unlimited, and nothing can actually cover him because he is unlimited. You know, it's like this. If you have to put something inside a box, then that should have limited dimensions. But when something is unlimited, then we cannot control it. We cannot wrap anything around it. We cannot envelop it. So that is not possible. So therefore, he is Ananta. So therefore, he is different from the living entities. He is a supremely subtle one. Subtle basically means that which we cannot identify or which we cannot recognize by our gross senses. Okay, so that is subtle. Subtle means which cannot be perceived by our knowledge acquiring senses. Like the skin. No, skin is required for touch sensation. Then there is eyes for seeing, ears for hearing, nose for smelling, then there is tongue for tasting, and then this tactile sense of the touch. So Krishna cannot be experienced through any of these five senses, five gross senses. So therefore he is subtle. He is completely subtle. And although the living entity may perceive himself as a living being, when a transcendentalist gets the knowledge, the transcendental knowledge that he is not this body, he is the soul, he will be able to relate to that I exist apart from all these material elements which cover me. So therefore he is subtle, but then the perception is possible through transcendental knowledge. But perceiving Krishna is not possible unless and until we have Krishna's mercy. Okay, so that is not possible. So therefore he is the supremely subtle one. He is the omniscient personality of Godhead. So although he is the subtle one, but then still he knows everything. It's not that because we are not able to perceive him, his existence is lost. No, his existence is always there, and he is omniscient, means he is aware of each and every small things. So, and they continue, who are always fixed in unchanging transcendence. So when Krishna, he is in the spiritual world, he is in the transcendental platform. When he comes to this material world, he is in the transcendental platform. There is no change in his position. Who sanction the opposing views of different philosophies. And those living entities who are bewildered by Krishna's deluding energy, Mahamaya, then they come up with different types of philosophies. But those philosophies are also sanctioned by Krishna only. So Prabhupada said, I think, that even if there is an atheist, he cannot be an atheist if Krishna does not give him sanction to become an atheist. So there's an atheism is there, then agnostics are there, and then anti-theists are also there. There's a difference, no? Atheists are those who, who do not believe in God, but anti-theists are those who oppose those who believe in God. There's a subtle difference between these two. And then there are agnostics who are skeptics, who neither believe, neither do not believe, but they're kind of non-believers only, or they don't have faith on the Supreme Lord. So there are different types of different philosophies. There's impersonalism, there's Mayavad, Mayavad is there. And then so many, capitalism, communism, this, that, so many isms are also there. So all these things are different opposing views. Each of these philosophies oppose each other, and they ultimately oppose the presence of Krishna also. And all these things is possible because Krishna says tathastu. Okay, sanctioned. Chalo, whatever you want to do, do. So unless and until Krishna's sanction is there, these people will not be able to propagate or even come up with such kind of thought process. So these are the qualities of the Lord. So he sanctions. So that basically suggests the Paramatma feature of the Lord. And who are the power upholding expressed ideas and the words that express them. So all these different ideas, different philosophies, everything is expressed through words. So the potency of these words to convince somebody else also comes from Krishna only. So Vachya and Vachaka. So Vachya is the expressed ideas, the ideas which are expressed. And these ideas are expressed through different words which are used. So we see, just like devotees, if there's a pure devotee and he goes out and preach, then his words have the potency and it can transform the heart of other living entities. We know about Prabhupada. He went to Western countries, then he spoke. And when he spoke, the people's heart became, and we are not speaking something which Srila Prabhupada did not speak. We also speak the same thing. But the other person does not get the transformation of heart, primarily because we ourselves are not properly transformed into devotional life. But then the potency is there. So Krishna gives that potency. And similarly, if you see in material realm also, there are so many prominent speakers, and when they speak, they're able to influence thousands and lakhs of people. And there are examples. Hitler is there. What did he speak? Whatever he spoke was, he was speaking about the extermination of the Jews in Germany. But then so many people got inspired. Correct. And then Churchill, when the World War was there, then Churchill basically inspired the entire British army, just comprised of Indians and so many other people. But then he channeled their energies and so on, and he was able to inspire so many people. And throughout history, we see so many personalities have been there who, by just their words, are able to influence so many people. So how is that possible? So we understand about spiritual realm, about transformation of person's consciousness into Krishna consciousness by the potency of the pure devotee. But this happens in the material realm also. So in the material realm also, when a person speaks some nonsensical philosophy, that is also accepted by so many people because those words are given the potency, or the sanction is given. The potency is provided by Krishna himself. So why does he do that? And all those things we'll discuss one by one. So this is what this translation speaks about. So we can see Chit, Achit, Ishvara, all those things are covered in this particular prayer. Very philosophical prayer. So we'll try to discuss the separate points one by one. So here the Nagpatnis are speaking about Bhuta Matendriya, so of the physical elements, and Matra and Indriya, the subtle basis of perception, and Indriya, the senses. So now there's something that we have to understand here, that normally when we speak about senses, the senses are subtle in nature. The senses do not directly denote the sense organs. The sense organs are there. So when we speak about sense perception, the eyes are there, nose is there, ears are there. Now, these are organs which are part of the body. But there is a difference between the sense organs and the sense itself, because sense perception is subtle. And even if the sense organ may not be active, but still the sense perception may be there. Okay, so there is an example. Through an example, we'll be able to understand it easily. So when we dream, when we are sleeping and when we are dreaming, so our eyes are closed, but if we see in the dream, or when we perceive that dream, there are visuals that go through the mind. There are impressions. There are impressions in the mind, and although our eyes are closed, but still we see some visuals. right? So those who remember their dreams after the sleep, they'll be able to understand. So how are we able to perceive that vision? Because vision is a subtle sense. So although our eyes are closed, the sense organ is actually not working, but the sense is active. So the mind is active, and the mind has stored impressions, which basically bring out all these different types of vision. Similarly for sound also. Now, although we may not be hearing anything at that point of time, but still we remember tunes. Or still in our mind itself, if there is a kirtan tune or there is some song, whatever it may be, then the tune, when we are repeating within our mind, then there's a hearing process also that happens. But then our ears are not hearing that song at that point of time. So the hearing process is also very subtle, and we can perceive it. It's easy. So that way, the senses are oriented around the mind, and they provide experience even without gross sense objects. Okay, this is also important to understand that when the mind has impressions and these impressions are brought forth, although our sense organs may not be active, but just by the thought of something, then there is a certain amount of happiness which is being experienced. And there's a tactile sense, which is the sensation of touch. Then there's a sensation of taste, there's a sensation of smell. And these are gathered from impressions. So for example, if you are hungry, and then we get to know that there's a very, this particular food item is going to be served in the lunch today. And then we know, we like that because we have already tasted it and there's a favorable impression in the mind. Then just to think or just to know that that particular item will be served, there's a certain amount of experience of happiness or elation or expectation or hankering that is there. So that gives a certain amount of happiness. Correct? So all this thing, this happiness and distress is a state of mind, and that comes through the sense perception. And these sense perceptions are subtle in nature. So that's the whole point that we are trying to make here. So the sense objects may not be active. The sense organs may not be active. They may not be in contact with the sense objects. But still, because of the previous impressions and the experiences that the mind has, there is a certain amount of happiness or distress thinking about something, or even just perceiving that subtle sense itself. There's a certain amount of experience. And most prominently, this is very much evident in sex life. So when a boy is growing, or when a child grows up, then when he attains the teenage age, 13, 14, 15, 16, he, in this lifetime, that boy or that girl does not have any experience of gross sex life. Correct? But then because of the past life's impressions, there is an impetus to have association of the opposite sex. How does that come about? And then when we think, and when in that particular age, when the boy thinks about it, thinks about the opposite sex, looks at it, nothing is happening at that time. No gross manifestation, no approach, nothing is happening. But still that thought itself gives a certain amount of pleasure or happiness. Right? So that how does that happen? That's because the sense perception itself. And when we speak about sense perception, it is material enjoyment. There's a happiness that is being experienced. So that happiness is experienced even without a gross contact with the object of that particular sense. So sense perception actually happens everything in the mind itself. So that is why the yogis or devotees are able to control their senses, because they understand it's all a play of mind. The senses cannot be satisfied only by coming in contact with the sense objects. The happiness or distress that a person experiences is only a state of mind. So if the state of mind is not proper, then even if a person has very nice dishes in front of him, the food items that he likes, he will not be able to taste. Say for example, if somebody near to him has passed away, or somebody near to him has met with an accident, he's in a very morose state. Does not matter how many nice foodstuffs we keep in front of him, he will not be able to enjoy it. The sense object is there, the senses are there, and the impression is also there that he likes that particular sense, or maybe gulab jamun, rasgulla, whatever it may be. But he will not be able to enjoy it because the state of mind is not proper. So that's why the pure devotees, they do not give lots of attention to what the mind hankers or desires, because they understand that all these things is just an illusion. It's just a state of mind. And if one fixes himself in Krishna consciousness, because he's always in contact with Krishna, then that way the mind is controlled. Krishna speaks about that in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita as to how one can control his mind. And that way the senses can also be controlled. And even if we see, even if we speak about the gross manifestation or engaging in sense gratification grossly, still there is no happiness there. Because see, whenever we have to relate it to the experiences that each one of us individually has, so the happiness is there, or there's an anticipation. When there's an anticipation of or hankering of something, then the mind says that if we get that particular sense object, then I'll become happy. That anticipation is there. If I can go to some particular place, then I'll attain happiness. If I can buy a particular object, if I can have this particular material object, does whatever it may be, within our home, maybe a sofa or a phone or a laptop, whatever it may be. Or for Mataji's, if some nice utensils are there in the kitchen for cooking nicely, or some facilities are there in the kitchen, that will make me happy. So there's an anticipation or there's an hankering which gives pleasure to some extent, saying, okay, if I have this particular thing, then I'll be happy. And when the object is attained, when that particular object is brought or it's attained and is purchased, then it leads to a contentment. This is satisfaction. Okay, now I have whatever I was hankering for all this time, finally I have got it. After 1 year, 2 years, whatever it may be, finally I have got it. But then once you get it, and then is the happiness permanent after that you have got this particular object and now for the entire life you are always happy because you have got that particular object? It's not. As soon as you get that object, then the happiness is there for a certain time, then it stops and the mind starts thinking about another thing. It starts thinking about another thing. If I can get that particular thing, then I'll be happy. So this is Gadan. Now whatever he was hankering for till now, that is done. Move on. So that is there. So move to the next object. So the sense object or the sense gratification does not satisfy in that sense, because once the sense object comes in contact with the senses, then the objective of the mind is achieved. Correct? The anticipation or hankering, that is fulfilled now. So because that fulfillment happens, then there is certain amount of contentment, and after that the mind has to hanker something more. And this basically proves the point that because the desire to become happy comes from the soul and it's pervertly reflected in the desires within the mind due to the three modes of material nature, does not matter whatever we do to satisfy the mind will never be satisfied. It will always move on and look out for further sense objects to satisfy itself. So it leaves one empty. So till the soul is satisfied, the mind will never be satisfied. And this is also the reason when we speak about material development, material advancement, progress of countries, this, that and all, it's all because it does not matter how much endeavor we make, does not matter how many technological advancements happen. There's always an endeavor to do more, to have new and new varieties of sense enjoyment. And when that happens, when there's an attempt or an endeavor to satisfy the senses, to satisfy the mind, then the living entity gets entangled within this material world more and more. Okay, he is not able to understand that the mind cannot be satisfied. So this is where transcendental knowledge becomes very important. Because once one attains transcendental knowledge, then he knows that engaging in sense gratification is an unnecessary waste of time. So we see, even devotees, new devotees who have taken up Krishna consciousness and they are studying Bhagavad Gita, they're regularly attending programs, coming to classes and so on. When these devotees start practicing Krishna consciousness earnestly, and then because of their previous impressions, because of the modes of material nature, they're pushed to perform certain activities of sense gratification, then after that activity is performed, then there is a moroseness. There is moroseness, there is depression, there is, what did I do? I wasted my time. I am not supposed to do this. I am not supposed to do that. There is a self-chastisement that also happens, that, I wasted so much amount of time on something which is actually not important at all. There is certain amount of guilt also that is experienced. So a materialistic person, a person who has material consciousness, he will not be able to experience it. For him, if there is no contentment, he will move on to the next sense object. What I can do next so that I can become happy. But for a devotee, it's not like that. No, he comes because he has got little amount of transcendental knowledge. He understands that whatever activities or whatever he has performed or whatever thing that he has done, the work that he has done, or whatever sense gratification activity that he has performed, it's actually useless waste of time, and then he starts condemning himself. We're talking about those devotees who are serious about Krishna conscious life, who have come new. right? And the karmis, they do have no transcendental knowledge, so they move on, they keep on engaging their sense gratificatory propensities in advancing more and more. So that way they are in illusion, correct? So that's why the Nagpatis are praying here. They're giving this picture that by your arrangement, right, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. So this hankering after sense gratification itself is the reason. Sense gratification will never satisfy the mind. It's just an illusion, it's just a perception, a false perception. Illusion means what? Illusion means that which is perceived falsely, or that which does not exist. So by becoming happy by performing sense gratification is a myth. It does not happen, it does not exist. But then the mind keeps saying that, oh, if you do this particular activity, you have the sense object, your senses interact with that particular sense object. It will not speak philosophically like this, but then if I meet my desire, then I'll become happy. So that process always keeps on going for those who are deluded by the three modes of material nature. And even for those people who have got everything in their life, then they are also put in delusion. So it's not that the richest people, or the Ambanis, the Adanis and so on, they are all very happy because they have got everything. They have so much money that whatever they think of, they can get. Okay, so therefore, there's nothing for them to hanker about, or there's nothing to aspire about. But still, that aspiration comes in the more subtle form. Okay, it's not gross sense objects anymore, it's Labha, Puja and Pratishtha. So it comes in a more subtle form. So this Pratishtha is there. There is this respect, there's an honor is there. So although you may have so much money, and if you stop working, then the pratishtha goes down. So that they will not let happen. So pratishtha is there. A false identification with the body, there's a false prestige that's associated with that particular person. So they go through the same work. Although they have so much money and they have everything that they can gain within this material world, but still they work hard, 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, just to maintain that false prestige in their life. So sense gratification is not only the gross combination of the senses with the sense objects, it also mental. And then there are intellectual sense gratifiers also, who are our scientists or technologies and these politicians, or those who do all this political analysis, this, that and so on. They're all intellectual sense gratifiers. So through their intelligence, they try to satisfy their senses. And it's not that they work only on one particular stage and then they're satisfied completely about it. They have to keep on doing something else or the other. So it's not that once a scientist achieves a Nobel Prize, then he sits down in his house. No, he does further research. He has to keep on moving because that intellectual pursuit is always there. So that is why, and all these things are possible because Krishna is the ultimate soul of all these physical elements of gross sense gratification, of the vital layer of life, of the mind, intelligence, consciousness. All this delusion of the living entity within this material world is possible by the arrangement of Krishna. That is how it is possible. And this is mentioned in Prahlad Maharaj also speaks about this in his prayers to Lord Nrsimhadev. So he says this whole concept of sense gratification is basically Shruti Sukha. So he's used this word Shruti Sukha. Shruti Sukha means the happiness is there, but it's only heard of. It's never experienced. So although people think that by performing sense gratification, by doing sense gratificatory activities, they'll attain happiness, it's only heard of it. There's only an anticipation. There's only an hankering about it, but it's never achieved. So it's Shruti Sukha, he says. So, and he says, Kutrashisha Shruti Sukha Mrikatrishni Rupaha Kvedam Kalevaram Ashesha Rujam Viroha Nirvidyate Natu Jano Yad Apiti Vidvan Kamanalam Madhulavaihi Shamayan Durapaihi. So he says, Kutrashisha. So, people think that having material opulence is a benediction. It's a benediction. If I have this particular object, if I have these many facilities, it's the Lord's benediction upon me. It's Kutra Ashisha. This is benediction for me. But then this benediction is actually useless because only Shruti Sukha. Just by having all these different things, one cannot actually experience happiness. It's all heard. It's just like Mriga Trishni. Mriga Trishni is translated as, it's a mirage in the desert. Now we know about mirage. When there's intense heat, and then a person, he can see that there's water, or he perceives something as water, and he thinks that he will be able to satisfy his thirst by taking that water. But does that water exist? It does not. It's just an illusion. It's just a mirage. So it's an illusion of the eye. The eye says that there is water, but actually there is not water. Similarly, Shruti Sukha, by hearing, we think, oh, there is happiness in that. But then there is no happiness. Correct? So I'll just read this translation. It's very good. In this material world, every living entity desires some future happiness. He thinks, if something I attain in the future, I'll be very happy. Which is exactly like a mirage in the desert. Where is water in the desert? Or in other words, where is happiness in this material world? As for this body, what is its value? It is merely a source of various diseases. We want to enjoy through this body, but this body is merely a source of disease. Every now and then, something or the other keeps coming. So the happiness is never permanent. Forget about permanence. It's not even there for a couple of minutes or couple of hours at the max. The so-called philosophers, scientists and politicians know this very well, but nonetheless they aspire for temporary happiness. Because not only philosophers, scientists or politicians, even a person who's thoughtful, he can understand that the happiness that he tries to achieve, it always eludes him. He never gets that happiness. He thinks that, at that particular moment, he thinks, if I get so much amount of money, I'll be so happy. Or if I get this particular object, I'll be so happy. But then, does he really achieve that happiness when he gets that object? Does he really achieve that happiness when he has so much amount of money or whatever material opulences he desires for? One may desire a beautiful wife. He gets married to a beautiful wife. Then we know what happens in Grihastha life. Is he happy throughout his Grihastha life? It's an illusion, right? So that's what it is. So although they know, but then it's not possible to be happy. So many difficulties are there. So the so-called philosophers, scientists and politicians know this very well. But nonetheless, they aspire for temporary happiness. Happiness is very difficult to obtain. So much endeavor has to be made to attain some material happiness. And people keep on working for years and years together just to earn or just to maintain their family, but still it becomes so difficult. Correct? So happiness is very difficult to obtain for them, but because they are unable to control their senses, they run after the so-called happiness of the material world and never come to the right conclusion. So although this happiness is so difficult to obtain, because they are not able to control their senses, they keep on running after that happiness, which never comes to their hand. It is like a carrot hanging in front of a donkey. As the donkey moves, the carrot also moves. What can you achieve then? No? He never gets the carrot. Similarly, the living entity never gets happiness within this material world. It's not possible. It should be completely rejected. Correct. So, there is this, in the Harmonist magazine, there is an article which was written, the Mahaprasad or the Great Favor. And this is a section which I will read. And this speaks about the wise person or the introspective person who understands that sense gratification is completely futile. It's completely nonsense. So how he should try to remind himself on controlling his senses and controlling the mind. So I'll just read this. So he says, awakened soul says in effect to the mind and body. So this is what he says. I am not identical with you. I do not want what you require. He's speaking to the mind and the body. So I am not identical with you. Means the living entity is not identical with this body and mind. And I do not want, I as a pure spirit soul do not want what you require. I have so long believed that I was identical with yourselves and that our interests were the same. So the living entity, the body is hankering, the mind is hankering, the gross senses are hankering for sense gratification. And the living entity thought that that is what is good for me. Satisfying the body, satisfying my senses, satisfying the mind is what is important for me. So I was completely identifying myself with the body. So, So he says, I have so long believed that I was identical with yourselves and that our interests were the same. But I now find that I am really and categorically different from you. You are all matter. I am spirit. I am made wholly of the principle of self-consciousness, while both of you are made of dead matter. Being matter, you can act and be acted upon by matter under the laws of nature. nature makes and unmakes you. Means it's manifest. The material nature is manifest at one point of time and then it becomes unmanifest. So nature makes and unmakes you, but she has no power over me. Because now he's the wise person who's identifying himself as the living entity. Being spiritual in nature, the living entity, the material nature actually has no power on the living entity. So he continues, the wise person, the awakened soul, he continues, I am not benefited by your growth or harmed by your decay. So when I'm growing, when my body is growing from childhood to youth, and then the youth is so much of energy is there. It's said it's like a foam. So when the foam is there and it is, it absorbs water, and then when you press that foam, then water gushes out. Right? So much water has been absorbed that it gushes out. So youth is like that. So because so much energy is there in the body, so when he performs sense gratification, there's a sensation of happiness, there's a sensation of elateness. That sensation is there. But as the body grows and then it starts to decay, then he performs the same activity, that happiness is not attained. Diseases are attained. Got it? Prominent example we discussed, sex life. When a youth, he engages, he gets married when he's 15, 16, 17 or whatever, 20, 25 years old, then there's an impetus to have sex life. But then as he ages, energy of the body decreases, then the foam does not absorb water anymore. So even if he performs sexual activity, still there is not enough pleasure or happiness there. So by this growth and this decay, the living entity is actually not affected. It's just a perception of the mind. So when the body is strong, then a person starts to think that he can satisfy himself, he can enjoy the entire world, but the body is not going to remain the same way it is now. It is going to decay. It is going to dwindle down and it's going to meet with the old age and death at a certain point of time. So the amount of sense gratification or the satisfaction or happiness that one tries to experience, it is not going to be permanent. So therefore happiness is not permanent. So even if one person says that I'll enjoy and I'll roam around this world, I'll do this, I'll do that and all, how much can he do? In old age, he has to stay in one place. He will not be able to move around. The body will decay. So, this awakened soul, he continues that I am not benefited by your growth or harmed by your decay. You grow and decay by the laws that govern your relationships with this physical universe. Falsely identifying myself with you, I find myself compelled to suffer pain and pleasure due to the physical problems that overtake you. Right? When the living entity or the conditioned living entity falsely identifies with the body, then he is compelled to suffer pain and pleasure, the dualities of this material world. I find myself unnaturally yoked to your functions such as eating, drinking, producing thought, etc., etc., and I am forced to believe them to be my own functions by which I am benefited. So the living entity who identifies with his body, he thinks by eating he is benefited, by drinking, by producing thought, and by engaging in mental and intellectual activities, he thinks he is benefited. But the living entity is not benefited. He only continues his suffering with this material world by getting entangled in all these different bases of sense gratification. Of course, and then he continues, of course I shall have to stay with you as long as it is intended by providence that I should suffer the consequences of this unnatural alliance with you. So now I got this body. So I cannot commit suicide and leave this body. So of course I have to stay with you till the time intended by providence, by the laws of nature, to continue in this unnatural alliance. But I shall from this time do nothing to please you. I shall permit you to do only what I consider to be necessary for my well-being, regaining my natural position of free conscious existence, unhampered by any unnatural domination caused by longing for material enjoyment. So he says, the awakened soul, he says, I shall permit you to do only what I consider to be necessary for my well-being. So for my well-being means, I have to eat to maintain my body and soul together. That I will decide. I will decide what I should eat. I will decide when I should sleep, which means basically I will regulate myself. You do not have any power over me. So 3 modes of material nature, you may try to manipulate me. But then because I am different from this mind, I am different from this body, I will not allow you to exert your power on me. No, I will decide what I have to do. So that is determination. That's the determination that every devotee should have. The awakened soul should have that. Whenever the mind or the body, it drags the living entity, it drags us to a certain amount of sense gratification, then it's the determination of the living entity saying, no, you cannot control me. It is I who will be in control. And I will decide what I'm supposed to do. But then because we misidentify ourselves with the mind, we somehow think that if I perform this particular activity, I will become happy. So this is all misidentification with the body. That's why the transcendental knowledge is very, very important. Because one who has transcendental knowledge, he can distinguish between what is matter and what is spirit. What is good for his material, or not good for material life, but what is good for his spiritual life, and what constitutes of his material activities. So therefore, in Shastras, in different, in Vedic literatures, in Vedanta also, the level or the position of transcendental knowledge is always glorified. Because one who has transcendental knowledge, he'll be able to distinguish himself from the body, from matter, and he'll be able to engage himself in spiritual activities. And Krishna also speaks about this in Bhagavad Gita. So the 3rd chapter speaks about Karma Yoga. The 4th chapter speaks about transcendental knowledge. So after giving a summary, or after giving basically summary of Bhagavad Gita, of the important philosophical points, in 2nd chapter, he starts asking Arjuna to perform activities, prescribed duties. That is in 3rd chapter. And that is supposed to lead, or rather not supposed to lead, that leads one to transcendental knowledge. And when he acquires transcendental knowledge, then from that point onwards, all his activities takes a devotional shape. So if we analyze the verses of Bhagavad Gita also, in 3rd chapter, many verses will be speaking about, Krishna will not speak about pure devotional service. In the verse itself, of course, Srila Prabhupada explains that. In the verse itself, Krishna will not speak much about devotional service, but after, from the 4th chapter, start from the 4th chapter itself, Krishna establishes his superior position, saying, I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I spoke this particular knowledge to Sun God these many years. So, Aparam Bhavado Janma. Arjuna is asking question, how is it possible? Then Krishna says that I have been through so many births, you have been through so many births, I remember everything. So you start thinking about me, you know me as I am, is what Krishna is saying, and that is the start of transcendental knowledge. And from that time onwards, then we see in the end of 4th chapter, 5th chapter, 6th chapter, 7th chapter, Krishna is continuously exhorting Arjuna that you should perform activity, but in consciousness of me. You should perform activity because you are supposed to render devotional service on to me. So having that transcendental knowledge as the base, then one can perform his activities within this material realm also as a service to Krishna. So the base always remains, the transcendental knowledge always remains as the base, and that's why the Vedic literature also glorify that jnana will lead to moksha. So when they speak about jnana leading to moksha, it's not only about sitting in one place, performing mental speculation, doing mental speculation or intellectual speculation, and thinking that, oh, I know what is Brahman, I know what is this, that, but I will not do any activity, I'll just sit on my chair. Which basically means he's influenced by tamoguna, his knowledge is useless. So when knowledge is attained, then there is activity. Those activities are spiritual activities. Those are not material activities anymore. Correct. So I'll just continue this. So he says, of course, I shall have to stay with you as long as it is intended by providence that I should suffer the consequences of this unnatural alliance with you. But I shall from this time do nothing to please you. I shall permit you to do only what I consider to be necessary for my well-being, regaining my natural position of, and what is the natural position? Of free conscious existence, unhampered by an unnatural domination caused by longing for material enjoyment. So when there's longing means when there's hankering for material enjoyment, then the 3 modes of material nature are dominating over me. So which is unnatural to me because I'm always a free conscious spirit. As a spirit soul, I'm completely free from the modes of material nature. I should not allow that unnatural domination because of my longing or your longing for material enjoyment. And he says, I refuse to be any more a slave of the sensuous inclinations of the mind and body. So this is how the awakened soul speaks. So it's, when we read this, when we read this together, it's a very good reminder for us that we should not be engaging in any of these activities of so-called sense gratification. Okay, so actually, so then There are so many things which are there in this verse, but we will not be able to discuss them. Maybe we can, in the next few verses, the same points will come up. So those will be discussed at that time. So I'll stop here. Actually, we did not even cross the first line. If we say, no, the first two, the first verse, we did not cross the first verse. So there's another verse, the 43rd verse, we did not even speak about. So maybe that can be covered in the next class, one who's doing 44. Maybe. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, yes, bro. Okay, so the question is, the Nagpatnis are able to pray so nicely. So do we have a background of how they are able to speak so eloquently and offer nice prayers? Is that correct? Yeah, so I am not aware of it. I actually did not try to find out. We do have the previous life of Kalia, so that is mentioned in Garga Samhita, but I am not sure if for Nagpatnis also, some previous stories there. If somebody knows, then can tell, but I'm not aware of it. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else?